Ever wondered what you're allowed to do when stranded at sea? In this video, I'm going to go over the very famous case of the shipwrecked sailors that ate one of the crew and were tried for murder. In 1883, Jack Want, a rich, sail enthusiast Australian lawyer, bought a boat from the finest place in the world to buy a boat in the 1800s, Albion. There was one problem though. He lived miles away and needed to somehow, somewhere get his new boat from England to Australia so he could flex on all of his land-bound mates, and after much consideration he decided to have it sailed to him, which sounds like a perfectly reasonable plan, but the boat was basically a chilled out inland yacht that wasn't supposed to be taken on long voyages across the open ocean. Undeterred by his new boat's product description, however, Jack hired a motley crew to sail the Mignonette from England to Australia, which involved navigating some notoriously difficult stretches of ocean near the Horn of Africa. The crew consisted of 4 men: Tom Dudley, the captain, Edwin Stephens, Edmund Brooks, and a 17-year-old orphan cabin boy called Richard Parker. On July 5th, while over 1,600 miles away from the Cape of Good Hope, the Mignonette was struck by a powerful wave that sank it in less than 5 minutes. Tom Dudley, being an experienced seaman, recognised the ship's fatal damage immediately, and fortunately for some, but not for all, there was just enough time to grab a small amount of supplies and lower the single shoddy 4-metre lifeboat into the water and get all 4 men inside before the Mignonette was dragged into the cold, dark depths. The crew had only managed to grab 2 tins of turnips while it was going down, and they had no fresh water to drink at all. Reports suggest that the first night was perilous and that the now stranded sailors had to fight off sharks with their oars. The meagre amount of food they had to survive didn't last long, and although the crew did catch and eat a turtle at one point, they really didn't have anything to catch rainwater with. Fortunately, however, they'd watched the right episodes of Bear Grylls and instead drank their own urine. About 10 or 11 days after the sinking, an idea was floated. This idea was that it might be good to draw lots, to pass the time, and where the loser would be eaten. Yep, that's right. If you get a sweat on over your accumulator cash out, imagine drawing lots to see who'll be devoured by wild-eyed castaways. But here they were, and at this point the crew couldn't agree on such an extreme course of action, so the discussion was shelved. Though I'm going to go out and take a guess that it was pretty hard to return to casual conversation with the guy that just expressed his interest in eating you. Discussions about sacrificing somebody intensified as the situation got worse. At around July 20th, the young cabin boy Parker became ill from drinking seawater. Fucking noob. And on what is estimated to have been a few days later, on either the 23rd or the 24th of July, Parker was believed to be in a seawater-induced coma, and Dudley, rising to meet this test of leadership, once again made the case for going full Leatherface on somebody. To be fair to him, his argument is one that will probably resonate with utilitarians around the world, that if they don't do this, they're all going to die anyway, so it's better for some of them to live. Brooks, being a staunch Cantanian, okay, I don't know if that's true, but go with it, refused the remade offer to draw lots. On the same night that Brooks refused, conspiracy was in the air. Dudley apparently had a one-to-one discussions with Stephens, and they both agreed that Parker, the poor orphan cabin boy, should be the one to meet his maker first. They reasoned that 1, he was already sick and probably going to die anyway, and killing him sooner would keep his blood fresh for longer, so it would be better to drink. Okay. And 2, they had wives and children, which made them cooler because they could get babes and he couldn't. After this discussion, the 2 men went to sleep, and on the morning of either the 24th or the 25th of July, Tom Dudley and Edwin Stephens held down the cabin boy and stabbed him in the throat with a penknife. All 3 men then feasted on Parker's body and drank his blood, with Dudley later stating that they were like mad wolves over who should get the most of that ghastly meal. The crew were rescued several days later on the 29th of July. The 3 survivors were picked up by a German vessel who brought them back to Falmouth, England, and upon their return the men were actually really honest. They made candid official statements of the events that transpired during the 24 days being lost at sea, as was required by English maritime law, because at least 2 of the men, Dudley and Stephens, believed they were protected by maritime conventions that differed from the ordinary law of the land. They got a harsh reality check, however, when they were remanded in custody and shortly after informed that the then Home Secretary, Sir William Harcourt, decided to prosecute the men for murder. Their defence was that of necessity. They had to. They were literally going to die if they didn't. They would never commit such atrocious acts under normal circumstances, but the cruel requirements of their situation meant that no matter what, somebody had to die. The judge disagreed and sentenced the men to death. His reasoning was that necessity, while it can be a defense for plenty of things, cannot be a defense to murder. You cannot kill somebody else just to save your own life out of necessity, because, as Chief Justice Lord Coleridge asked rhetorically, who is to be the judge of this sort of necessity? What standard do you use to compare the value of lives? Who gets to decide who lives and who dies? The judge was particularly keen to avoid some Lord of the Flies level shit going down at sea, and he seemed to particularly dislike the fact that the weakest, youngest, most vulnerable person was ganged up on, and asked whether it was more necessary to kill the cabin boy than any one of the other grown men. He said no it wasn't, and sentenced the two men to death. The tide of public opinion was with the Lost Mariners, however, which led to the Crown pardoning them for their deeds. In the end, they spent about 6 months in prison. This old case set a long-standing precedent that you can't use necessity as a defense to murder. The tragic events that unfolded after the sinking of the Mignonette helped inspire Lon Fuller's famous thought experiment of the Spelunkian explorers, a Monty Python sketch where a waitress takes a sailor's orders, and, for those of you who've seen or read Life of Pi, the name of the Bengal tiger is none other than Richard Parker. What do you think? Would you eat the cabin boy if you found yourself lost at sea? What lengths would you go to survive? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications if you want to catch future uploads that really test the limits of the stance the judge took in this famous case.